My name is Zelda Faywright, and 3 months ago, I watched my supervisor destroy what she thought was nothing but spreadsheets and meeting notes. She stood behind my workstation, announced to our entire department that my year of effort was worthless garbage, then pressed delete while 23 people stared. What she actually erased was the invisible foundation holding our company together. And when my phone rang 30 seconds later with a $500,000 job offer, I realized she had just handed me the perfect weapon for the most satisfying destruction I could have ever imagined. Before I tell you exactly how watching her panic became the sweetest moment of my professional life, could you please take a few seconds to hit that like button and subscribe? Because what I'm about to share will show you how one moment of cruelty can backfire in ways that seem impossible until they happen right in front of you. And trust me, you need to hear every detail of how this unfolded. Let me take you back to where this really started, because revenge stories always begin long before the actual revenge happens. 18 months ago, I joined Pemberton Analytics as a client relationship coordinator. The job description made it sound boring: maintain communication records, schedule follow-ups, track client satisfaction metrics. What they didn't mention was that our company was hemorrhaging accounts faster than anyone wanted to admit, and the previous person in my position had lasted exactly 4 months before quitting without notice. My supervisor, Quinla Brexworth, made it clear from day one that she considered my role unnecessary overhead. She was one of those people who believed business relationships were purely transactional: send invoices, deliver services, collect payments, repeat. The idea that clients might want actual human connection was foreign to her systematic approach to everything. But I saw something different in those first few weeks. When I reviewed our client files, I found page after page of dry communication logs that read like robot conversations. No personality, no warmth, no indication that anyone at our company had ever bothered to learn anything personal about the people sending us thousands of dollars every month. So I started doing something that seemed radical in that environment. I began treating our clients like actual human beings. When Vernon Hutchcraft, who ran a mid-sized manufacturing company, mentioned during a routine check-in call that his golden retriever had just been diagnosed with hip problems, I made a note. 2 weeks later, I followed up asking how the treatment was going. He was so surprised that someone remembered. He spent 20 minutes telling me about his weekend trip to find a specialist veterinarian. When Constance Fairweather celebrated her textile company's 15th anniversary, I sent a personalized message acknowledging the milestone and asking about her plans for growth. She ended up scheduling an additional consultation session that brought in $12,000 of unexpected revenue. These weren't grand gestures or expensive gifts. I simply listened when people shared pieces of their lives, remembered what mattered to them, and followed up in ways that showed I actually cared about their success beyond what they paid us. Quinla never understood what I was doing. She would walk past my workstation and see me typing what looked like casual conversation notes, and I could feel her disapproval radiating across the office space. During our monthly reviews, she would flip through my activity reports with visible frustration. "Why are you spending 45 minutes on calls that should take 15?" she would ask, tapping her pen against her clipboard. "Efficiency metrics show you're processing fewer interactions per hour than optimal." I tried explaining that longer conversations were building stronger relationships, that clients were specifically requesting to work with me on new projects, that our retention rate had improved by 37% since I started personalizing our approach. But Quinla only cared about numbers that fit her spreadsheet formulas. What she didn't realize was that I was building something far more valuable than efficient call logs. I was becoming the bridge between our company and the people who kept us in business. Roderick Yates, who owned a chain of specialty bookstores, started calling me directly when he needed anything instead of going through our main number. He told me he appreciated talking to someone who remembered that he was passionate about vintage mystery novels and that his daughter was studying literature at university. Tempest Livingwell, whose catering business accounted for our third largest monthly revenue, began recommending our services to other companies specifically because she enjoyed our conversations about her weekend farmers market visits and her grandmother's recipe collection. Month after month, I watched our client satisfaction scores climb. while Quinla remained focused on efficiency metrics that completely missed the point. She was measuring how quickly we could process interactions while I was building the loyalty that would determine whether those interactions continued happening at all. The breaking point came during our annual strategic planning meeting. Our CEO, Gideon Ashworth, was reviewing department performance when he mentioned that client retention had reached an all-time high. He specifically praised our relationship management approach and suggested expanding the personal touch strategy across other departments. I watched Quinla's expression shift as the credit for improved retention landed on what she considered my inefficient methods. After the meeting ended, she cornered me near the supply room. "I don't know what kind of performance theater you're running," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "But this company succeeds on professional excellence, not social hour conversations with clients." She assigned me to complete a comprehensive audit of all client interactions over the past year, demanding detailed documentation of every communication, every follow-up note, every relationship-building effort I had made. It was clearly intended as punishment, hundreds of hours of bureaucratic busywork that would pull me away from the actual relationship-building that was driving our success. But I approached the audit project with the same attention to personal detail that I brought to client work. I created intricate records showing not just what communications had occurred, but how those communications had translated into business outcomes. I documented the catering referrals that Tempest had generated, the expanded services that Vernon had purchased after we discussed his company's growth plans, the contract renewal that Broderick had signed early because he trusted our partnership. The finished audit was 53 pages of proof that personal attention to client relationships was directly responsible for over $200,000 in additional revenue. Every casual conversation about weekend plans or family celebrations had strengthened business ties that competitors couldn't replicate with their generic professional approach. I was proud of that audit. It represented not just a year of work, but a year of genuine connections that had transformed how our company related to the people who trusted us with their business, which made what happened next even more devastating. Quinla called an all-hands department meeting on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. She announced that we needed to review our client relationship protocols and that my audit would serve as a case study for discussion. I assumed she was finally ready to acknowledge that personal attention was driving our improved performance. Instead, she directed me to display my audit files on the main conference room screen while the entire department watched. Then she began dissecting every personal note, every conversation detail, every relationship-building effort as evidence of unprofessional boundary violations. "This is exactly the kind of inefficiency that undermines our service standards," she declared, scrolling through months of careful documentation. "Personal chit-chat about pets and hobbies has no place in business communications. These files represent a complete failure to maintain appropriate professional distance." I felt heat spreading across my neck as 23 coworkers watched her tear apart work that had generated significant revenue for our company. She was presenting my greatest professional accomplishment as a cautionary tale about what not to do. But then she did something that crossed a line I never expected her to cross. She pulled up the file containing my complete audit database, every client note, every relationship detail, every conversation record that proved how personal attention was driving our business success. Her finger moved toward the delete option while she continued talking about the need for professional standards. "This entire approach is garbage," she announced, her hand hovering over the deletion command. "Beginning today, we return to efficient, professional client communication protocols." And then she clicked delete. I watched a year of relationship building disappear from the screen. 53 pages of documented connections that had generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, gone in one vindictive moment. The silence in the conference room was absolute as everyone processed what had just happened. Quinla turned away from the screen with a satisfied expression, clearly expecting me to accept this humiliation and start rebuilding my work according to her preferred methods. But she had made one crucial miscalculation. While she was destroying my documentation, she hadn't destroyed the actual relationships I had built. The clients who trusted me, who called me directly, who had shared personal details about their lives and businesses. Those connections existed in their hearts and minds, not in our computer files. And apparently, Some of those connections had been paying attention to our company dynamics more carefully than anyone realized. My phone started buzzing before Quinla had finished explaining her new efficiency protocols. The caller ID showed Marlowe Partners, a consulting firm that had recently formed when 3 former colleagues left to start their own company. I stepped out of the conference room to take the call, my hands still shaking from watching my work get deleted in front of everyone. "Zelda," said the voice on the other end, "we've been watching what's happening at Pemberton, and we want to talk." The conversation that followed would change everything. Marlowe Partners had been tracking our client retention improvements, and they knew exactly who was responsible for the relationships that kept major accounts happy. They had been planning to approach me for months, but watching Quinla destroy my audit files had convinced them that timing was perfect. "We're prepared to offer you $500,000 annually to join our team," they said, "plus equity participation and complete autonomy over client relationship strategies. We believe personal attention is the future of business consulting, and we want you to build that future with us." $500,000. More than double my current compensation, working for people who valued exactly what Quinla considered worthless inefficiency. But the most beautiful part of their offer wasn't the money. "We know you can't bring proprietary information from Pemberton," they continued, "but we also know that client relationships are built on trust and personal connection, not on database files. If you choose to join us, and if clients choose to work with someone they trust, rather than staying with someone who treats them like transaction numbers, that's simply the natural consequence of different business philosophies." I understood immediately what they were suggesting. They weren't asking me to steal clients or violate any legal agreements. They were simply pointing out that if I left Pemberton and clients decided they preferred working with someone who remembered their dog's health problems and their daughter's college plans, that was their choice to make. When I walked back into the conference room, Quinla was still lecturing about professional efficiency standards, while my former coworkers stared at their hands or notebooks, clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. She noticed my return and paused her presentation. "Do you have questions about our new communication protocols?" I looked around the room at people I had worked alongside for 18 months, then at the blank screen where my audit had been displayed before being destroyed, then back at Quinla's expectant expression. "Actually," I said, "I have something to announce." What happened next would become the most satisfying moment of my professional life, but I want to save that for the next part of this story, because the revenge that followed was so perfectly orchestrated by Quinla herself that you need to hear exactly how her own actions created the domino effect that brought down everything she thought she was protecting. The beauty of what unfolded wasn't that I planned some elaborate scheme to hurt her or the company. The beauty was that by deleting my relationship-building work, she had just eliminated the only thing keeping our biggest clients from walking away. She thought she was deleting inefficient documentation. What she actually deleted was the foundation of customer loyalty that took a year to build and could disappear in a matter of weeks. And when my phone rang with that $500,000 offer, I realized she had just handed me the key to the most elegant revenge possible, simply letting natural consequences unfold while she watched everything she thought she controlled slip away forever. "I'm resigning from Pemberton Analytics, effective immediately," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "I'll be joining Marlowe Partners as their Director of Client Relations." The conference room went completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning unit humming in the background and someone's pen clicking nervously against their notepad. Quinla's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to something that looked almost like panic. "You can't just quit in the middle of a department meeting," she stammered, clearly thrown off by this unexpected development. "There are protocols, notice requirements, transition procedures." "Actually," I replied, pulling out my phone to show the contract offer I had just received, "my employment agreement allows for immediate resignation in cases of hostile work environment or professional misconduct. Having my work deleted in front of colleagues while being publicly humiliated qualifies on both counts." Gideon Ashworth, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately before making any hasty decisions." But I was done with private discussions and diplomatic solutions. Quinla had chosen to humiliate me publicly, so she would get to experience the consequences just as publicly. There's nothing to discuss, I said, gathering my personal items from the conference table. My decision is final. I'll submit formal resignation paperwork within the hour. As I walked toward the conference room exit, I could feel 23 pairs of eyes following my movement. Some of my coworkers looked shocked, others looked impressed, and a few looked like they were reconsidering their own career choices. Quinla called after me, her voice higher than usual. "You're making a huge mistake. Marlowe Partners is a startup with no proven track record. You're throwing away job security for some fantasy about relationship building being more important than professional standards." I paused at the doorway and turned back to face her. We'll see which approach proves more valuable. Within 24 hours, I had cleaned out my desk, completed exit interviews, and started my new position at Marlowe Partners. Their office was smaller than Pemberton's, but filled with energy and excitement about building something innovative in the consulting space. More importantly, I was finally working with people who understood that business relationships were built on genuine human connection, not efficiency metrics and standardized communication protocols. But the real validation of my decision came in the weeks that followed, as I watched the natural consequences of Quinla's actions unfold with devastating precision. I hadn't reached out to any Pemberton clients. I hadn't made sales calls or sent recruitment messages. I simply updated my professional profiles to reflect my new position and continued being the same person who had spent a year building authentic relationships with people who needed consulting services. The first call came on Thursday morning, 3 days after I started at Marlowe Partners. Vernon Hutchcraft, the manufacturing company owner whose golden retriever I had asked about during routine check-ins, called my new office number directly. "Zelda," he said, "I heard through the professional network that you've moved to a new firm. I wanted to congratulate you and ask about your new company's capabilities." We talked for an hour about his business needs, his expansion plans, and yes, his dog's improved mobility after the specialist treatment. By the end of the conversation, he had scheduled a consultation meeting to discuss transitioning his account to Marlowe Partners. The second call came that same afternoon. Constance Fairweather, whose textile company anniversary I had celebrated, wanted to discuss her upcoming project needs with someone who understood her business philosophy. "I've been working with consulting firms for 12 years, she told me, "and you're the first person who ever made me feel like my company mattered beyond the invoice amount. If you're offering the same personal attention at your new firm, I'm interested in making a change." By the end of my first week at Marlowe Partners, I had received calls from 6 former Pemberton clients. Not because I had solicited them, but because they preferred working with someone who treated them as individuals rather than account numbers. Meanwhile, back at Pemberton Analytics, Quinla was starting to realize what she had actually deleted when she destroyed my relationship-building documentation. I heard about her growing panic through mutual connections in the professional community. Apparently, she had tried to reach out to major clients for routine check-ins, only to discover that many of them were no longer interested in continuing their contracts. When she called Vernon Hutchcraft to schedule his quarterly review, he politely informed her that he was exploring other consulting options and would not be renewing his annual agreement. When she contacted Constance Fairweather about upcoming project needs, Constance explained that she had found a consulting partner who better understood her business values. One by one, the clients I had spent a year building relationships with were making the choice to work with someone who remembered their personal details, their business challenges, and their individual communication preferences. Quinla had believed that client loyalty was tied to Pemberton's brand reputation and service quality. She was discovering that client loyalty was actually tied to the personal connections that made people feel valued and understood. The third week after my departure, I received a call that made everything clear about how devastating Quinla's decision had become. Broderick Yates, the bookstore owner who had started calling me directly instead of going through Pemberton's main number, wanted to share some information that he thought I should know. "Quinla called me yesterday," he said, asking if there were any service issues that might explain why I was considering other consulting options. When I told her I was following you to Marlowe Partners because I valued our personal connection, she actually argued with me about it. He laughed, but not in a way that suggested he found it amusing. She told me that professional relationships should be based on service quality, not personal chit-chat about books and family. She said I was making an emotional decision instead of a business decision. Can you believe that? She was lecturing me about how I should choose my own consulting partners. That phone call revealed everything about why Quinla's approach was failing so spectacularly. Even when faced with the evidence that personal relationships were driving client decisions, she couldn't adjust her philosophy. She was still trying to convince people that efficiency metrics mattered more than feeling valued and understood. By the end of my first month at Marlowe Partners, 14 former Pemberton clients had either switched to our firm or initiated conversations about potential transitions. These weren't small accounts. They represented over 60% of Pemberton's annual revenue. I wasn't actively recruiting them. I was simply being available when they called, remembering details about their lives and businesses, and providing the same personal attention that had built our relationships in the first place. Marlowe Partners was thriving beyond their most optimistic projections, while Pemberton Analytics was experiencing the worst client retention crisis in company history. The most satisfying part wasn't the money or the professional success, though both were incredible. The most satisfying part was knowing that Quinla had created this entire situation herself through her stubborn refusal to value what clients actually wanted. She could have supported my relationship-building approach. She could have learned from the improved retention rates and client satisfaction scores. She could have recognized that personal attention was generating measurable business results. Instead, she had chosen to publicly humiliate me and delete work that represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in client loyalty, apparently believing that her efficiency-focused philosophy was more important than actual evidence of what worked. 2 months after my departure, I heard through professional networks that Gideon Ashworth had called an emergency board meeting to address the client retention crisis. Pemberton Analytics was facing the possibility of layoffs, reduced operations, and potentially selling to a larger firm to survive the revenue loss. Quinla, who had been so confident about her professional standards and efficiency metrics, was now scrambling to explain how the company had lost most of its major accounts within 8 weeks. According to sources who were still working there, she had initially tried to blame my departure for the client defections, arguing that I had somehow poisoned client relationships or violated ethical standards to steal accounts. But the timeline didn't support her accusations. Clients weren't leaving immediately after I resigned. They were leaving after attempting to maintain relationships with Quinla's new efficiency-focused approach and discovering that they preferred working with people who treated them as individuals. The board investigation revealed exactly what I could have told them months earlier. Clients choose consulting partners based on trust, communication quality, and feeling valued, not on how quickly their calls get processed or how efficiently their concerns get categorized. Quinla had spent a year dismissing relationship building as inefficient social hour conversation, and now she was facing the consequences of that philosophy in the form of client defections that threatened the entire company's survival. 3 months after my departure, I received the call that made this revenge story complete. Gideon Ashworth contacted me personally to discuss what he called a potential partnership opportunity. He wanted to know if Marlowe Partners would be interested in acquiring Pemberton Analytics' remaining client accounts and possibly hiring some of their staff during what he described as a strategic restructuring process. The company that had considered my relationship-building approach inefficient garbage was now hoping to sell their remaining assets to the firm that had been built on exactly the principles Quinla had rejected. During our conversation, Gideon mentioned that they were also reevaluating leadership approaches in their client relations department. Reading between the lines, it was clear that Quinla's position was no longer secure. "I have to ask," he said toward the end of our call, "what would it take to bring you back to Pemberton as Director of Client Relations? We're prepared to offer significant compensation increases and complete autonomy over relationship management strategies." The irony was incredible. 3 months after watching my work get deleted in front of my colleagues, I was being recruited back to implement exactly the same approach at a much higher salary, with complete authority over the department that had rejected my methods. But I had no interest in returning to work for people who had only learned to value my approach after losing millions of dollars in revenue. "I appreciate the offer," I told him, "but I'm very happy with my current position. Marlowe Partners understood the value of personal client relationships from day one, rather than having to learn it through crisis. 6 months after leaving Pemberton Analytics, I was promoted to senior partner at Marlowe Partners with equity participation and responsibility for expanding our client relationship philosophy across multiple service lines. The clients who had followed me from Pemberton became the foundation for our most successful year in company history. Meanwhile, Pemberton Analytics underwent the strategic restructuring that Gideon had euphemistically described. They laid off 30% of their staff, sold their largest office space, and ultimately merged with a competitor who valued efficiency metrics over personal relationships. Quinla was not retained during the merger. I learned about her departure through LinkedIn updates and professional network conversations. According to former colleagues, she had spent her final months at Pemberton trying to rebuild client relationships using the same impersonal approach that had caused the crisis in the first place. She apparently never understood that the problem wasn't her communication skills or technical knowledge. The problem was her fundamental belief that business relationships should be purely transactional. The last update I heard about her situation came from a mutual professional contact who mentioned that she was having difficulty finding comparable positions because her most recent role had ended during a major client retention crisis. Potential employers were understandably concerned about hiring someone whose management approach had contributed to such significant revenue loss, especially in client-facing roles where relationship building was considered essential. I felt no pleasure in hearing about her career difficulties. My satisfaction came from knowing that the principles she had mocked and rejected were now recognized throughout our industry as essential for sustainable business success. Every consulting firm was investing in personal client relationship strategies. Every professional development program emphasized the importance of treating clients as individuals rather than transaction sources. Every successful consulting practice prioritized exactly the approach that Quinla had considered inefficient garbage. She had been wrong about what clients valued, wrong about what drove business success, and wrong about the importance of personal connections in professional relationships. And her wrongness had been revealed not through elaborate schemes or calculated attacks, but simply through allowing natural consequences to unfold after she chose to publicly destroy work that represented the foundation of customer loyalty. The most elegant revenge is always the kind where your enemy defeats themselves through their own actions, and you simply have to step aside and let their poor decisions create the destruction they deserve. Today, 2 years after watching my audit files get deleted in front of 23 colleagues, I'm running the client relations division for one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in our region. Our success is built entirely on the principle that Quinla rejected, that business relationships thrive when people feel valued, understood, and personally connected to their service providers. Every day, I get to work with clients who appreciate having their birthdays remembered, their family updates acknowledged, and their business challenges addressed with genuine personal investment in their success. And every day, I'm reminded that the best revenge against people who undervalue your contributions is simply proving them wrong through your continued success elsewhere. Quinla thought she was deleting inefficient documentation when she destroyed my relationship building work. What she actually deleted was the only thing preventing her professional world from collapsing around her. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is just letting people experience the natural consequences of their own terrible decisions while you build something better somewhere else. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had someone undervalue work that you knew was important, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Sometimes the best therapy for professional betrayal is sharing stories with people who understand what it feels like to have your contributions dismissed by people who should know better. And if you enjoyed hearing about how deleting my files became the beginning of Quinla's professional downfall, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about workplace revenge that writes itself when you simply let incompetent managers face the consequences of their own poor judgment.